Hello, welcome to Democratic TV. I'm here this afternoon with Mike Stewart, the chair of the House Democratic Caucus in our state legislature. And it's a good chance to have a one-on-one informal talk with Mike about what's been going on in the legislature and what does the future look like in terms of the upcoming campaign, which is a very important campaign. We know that the Democrats in the House are at the short end of a 2-to-1 Republican majority. And so this is a daily challenge to the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, Mike Stewart, and also every member of the Democratic Caucus. So, Mr. Chairman, what would you say was the highs and the lows, the successes, the shortcomings, the observations about the session just concluded?
You know, I think you can say this session, most people thought it was notable for the bad bills that didn't pass. I mean, there were a few very bad bills that the supermajority passed this year. I'd say the worst bill passed was the work requirements bill, which is sold as a kind of a common sense measure to require people who get Medicaid to work to get the Medicaid. It is a priority of the libertarian right, like the Koch brothers. Americans for Prosperity is a huge supporter, and the reason for that, they don't support bills to tinker with the framework of government. They support bills that undermine government entirely. The purpose of the work requirement bill is really to create a barrage of administrative barriers to getting Medicaid, which the sponsors know will have the effect over time of dramatically reducing the number of people who are receiving health care in this state. It's completely ridiculous because, of course, in this state we're already way behind because we're one of the handful of states that still hasn't expanded care under the Affordable Care Act. So we already are not providing enough health care in this state. The work requirements bill is designed to ensure that young mothers taking care of children with busy lives miss certain deadlines and get kicked off the rolls. Kicked off the rolls of basic health care that should be provided as a basic right to every single person in the country. So that was a particularly bad bill. The Democrats fought it at every turn, and we could not stop that bill from passing. But you had other significant bills that have come up year after year that weren't even introduced this year because of Democratic opposition. For the most significant being school vouchers. This is the first year in at least 5 years that we have not had to band together to defeat the school voucher bill. And the school voucher supporters have spent hundreds of thousands of dollars to promote their agenda, spent hundreds of thousands of dollars, in fact, in one House race in an effort to defeat Gloria Johnson, who's a big champion of public schools, as everybody in Knoxville knows. Despite all their expenditures, I think over time, by systematically fighting that bad agenda, Democrats with some Republican allies have stopped that, at least for the time being. So we didn't see that fight. The Democrats also killed some particularly bad bills this year. I would point out, I would single out as the worst, the Haslam administration's bill designed to make it harder for working people to go to college. The way the bill worked basically was, if you were going through our state school system and you were not moving fast enough, according to the drafters of the bill, you would be penalized. Your scholarships would be cut, essentially to penalize you for not moving quickly. Well, everybody I spoke to says that the people who move more slowly through the education system, through the college system, are the kids that work. And so what we were doing, and it was interesting that the Haslam administration took this position, we were saying, if you're a working person trying to get through school, we're going to make your life harder in a systematic sort of way.
Have you been able to figure out why they do this? I mean, Governor Haslam would like to have you believe that one of the great achievements of his administration is that everybody in Tennessee can go to college. And so that, but that isn't true in terms of when you think of the barriers that have been thrown up, as you mentioned. Now, I don't think anybody's aware of the bill you just mentioned. I mean, that's a well-kept secret.
Well, and you won't hear much about it from the Haslam administration because the Democrats killed it on the floor of the House, along with some Republicans. We worked very hard to kill that bill and killed it and took a caucus position against it, making it impossible for the bill to be brought back up on the floor. So that was an example of a really bad bill that would have had very significant effect statewide, and it was killed. And that's an example of the Democrats as a bloc stopping terrible legislation. I would say that bill, like so many bills that are coming through this, that are being touted by the supermajority, promoted by the supermajority, and promoted by the Haslam administration, comes from a fundamentally, I would say, libertarian viewpoint, where the animating principle is that people should not get help from their government to be successful. And that seems odd because our government is so successful at moving people forward in life. But I mean, that is where that comes from. I would say also the Haslam administration is notable for its lack of, for want of a better word, empathy with the people of Tennessee. And I'll give you another example, and this is great disappointment. The Democrats called for a very significant funding to address the opioid crisis, and instead of significant funding, the Haslam administration promoted a grandly named and much touted opioid plan that devoted about $15 million of state money to fighting the opioid crisis. Well, $15 million is certainly a nice amount of money if you're trying perhaps to deal with the opioid crisis in maybe half of one county. I mean, it's a totally laughable and ridiculous approach to the most significant health crisis faced by Tennessee in a generation. And that's just another example of where you just think there's got to be some disconnect between the Haslam administration and the people that actually live in the state of Tennessee.
Well, it's particularly disconnected because if Medicaid was expanded, in other words, in Tennessee, if TennCare was expanded through a mechanism like Insure Tennessee, the amount of federal money available to fight the opioid crisis in Tennessee would be 10 times greater than it is now. And we know that this opioid crisis is a real crisis. People are dying. Families are being torn apart. It is a true emergency. Money is available to fight that in a significant way, and yet the Haslam administration, along with the Republicans in the state legislature, refused to accept that money.
Yeah, and I will say, the Haslam administration, in so doing, first of all, of course, your point about expansion is such a fundamental one. Failure to expand health care under the Affordable Care Act at this point, when the Affordable Care Act is clearly going to be the law of the land for the foreseeable future, is just governmental malpractice. I mean, we are simply one of a handful of states that has said, we, under our federal system, are supposed to receive billions of dollars, but for no particular reason other than fear of lobbyists from Americans for Prosperity, the Koch brothers lobbying group, which has been the primary opponent of expansion, and perhaps some more radical Republicans who vote in Republican primaries. I mean, other than that political fear, there's no reason not to expand health care. So when you don't do that, you make everything harder. You make it harder to have rural hospitals. You make it harder to deal with the opioid crisis. You just systematically make the lives of Tennesseans harder.
Let me just break in one other time. And the utter absurdity of it is, we have turned down money on which you've already paid federal taxes. I mean, how dumb do you have to be to pay your taxes out of the federal money, and after you've paid the taxes and you're due the money to come back, reflecting the taxes you've already paid, you say, no, thank you. We'll let that money to go to Arkansas or to Kentucky or to Illinois or Michigan or wherever.
That's right. And I mean, it was to Governor Haslam's credit that he tried to expand health care with his Insure Tennessee plan, which was a perfectly good plan. And every Democrat in the House supported it from the outset. That's a very significant distinction between the parties. But his supermajority, the Republican supermajority, just essentially stood as a barrier that has prevented that very sensible policy adopted in 35 states from being, and in Kentucky and Arkansas and Indiana, all sorts of states right around here. The Republican supermajority, or the failure to pass expansion, is like a monument to the stupidity of the Republican supermajority. And it's really just government at its worst. It's kind of Washington politics where everybody knows. In Washington right now, and for a number of years, we've had a situation where even where people know what the right policies are, they're simply not enacted because we have such gridlock. And because I think the Koch brothers, among other Republicans, are continuously funding systematic efforts to undermine our federal government and its ability to do anything. So it's not merely a bipartisan gridlock, it's also the result of very concerted efforts by some of the most radical conservative people in the country to block any sort of effective legislation dealing with anything. But beyond that, so essentially the Republican supermajority's decision to block Insure Tennessee at the behest of the Koch brothers lobbyists here is an unfortunate extension of Washington politics and Washington gridlock into our state. It's just terrible government. With regard to opioids, though, I think the Haslam administration really it can't be criticized enough. And you just have to ask yourself whether anyone in the Haslam administration has ever taken time to actually get in a car and drive around the state of Tennessee and talk to anybody involved in the opioid crisis. It is such an acute crisis, and we are responding to it in the most ineffective what we're doing at best amounts to half measures and frittering around.
How about eighth measures?
Eighth measures, right. I mean, it's just, you can't say enough about how substandard and inadequate the Haslam administration's approach to that crisis is. I mean, there's just no significant expenditure of funds. The Democrats have consistently brought forward plans to spend, to create a fund to fund opioid treatment. We're talking in the $250 million range or $150 million range. Even that would not be enough, but at least it's addressing the crisis in a meaningful way. You just have to criticize the Haslam administration for essentially not seriously addressing this critical health crisis. That'll be left to the next governor.
Well, it's just an example of why the upcoming elections are so important. Now, I don't think anybody who has any sort of realistic grasp of the political composition of Tennessee at the moment thinks that all of a sudden the Republican supermajority can become a Republican superminority. But one does indeed hope that the process of rebuilding the Democratic Party and taking seats that ought to be represented by Democrats who are talking to the working men and women of the state, who are talking to the college students of the state in significant and real terms, that process can begin on this election cycle. And so I know that Michael Stewart has been working very hard to prepare the House Democratic candidates to make a real fight of it. And so tell us what sort of things you've been up to and what the situation looks right now and how it has changed from earlier years.
I think there are a couple of reasons with respect to with respect to previous years, this is a different time in a number of ways. First of all, the national situation is different. You know, in recent years, we've had wave elections that have generally benefited the Republicans. Certainly that's been true in Tennessee, but it's been true really across the United States. The Democrats have lost 1,000 House and Senate seats since 2008. So it's been difficult going in the state houses for Democrats. That's different now. The Democrats have won virtually every special election that's been held this year in the United States, including special elections in districts that President Trump won by 20 or 30 points. So clearly there's a new day with respect to politics, and I think what you're seeing is you have some Republicans that are disaffected now. They had hope for President Trump, and they now see that he's just falling right into the groove of your standard corporate Republican agenda, despite his populist talk. So some Republicans are staying home. I think more significantly, Democrats are just falling all over themselves to go vote, and those votes are having a significant impact on these state elections. So you have a different situation. You also have some very significant Democratic options at the top of the ticket. You know, Governor Bredesen is extremely popular. He is now running for Senate, and he is, according to every poll, ahead of his opponent, Marsha Blackburn. I think that's particularly significant because obviously everybody knows Governor Bredesen, so his popularity reflects not just a flash in the pan, but the deep knowledge of the voter. By contrast, Congresswoman Blackburn is not that well known, and I think that as voters start to look carefully at her and they start to learn what she's been doing up in Washington, that increased knowledge is not going to benefit her in the polls. Take, for example, her approach to opioids, which was to collude with opioid manufacturers to make it hard for the DEA to go after opioid manufacturers. I don't think that's what most Tennesseans think is what their leaders should be doing. In any event, you have this extremely popular leader and successful campaigner who's leading the Democratic ticket, and you have two gubernatorial candidates, Craig Fitzhugh, the Democratic leader in the House, and Carl Dean, the former mayor of Nashville, either one of whom will be a very strong contender as the Democratic gubernatorial candidate. So you're going to have two strong candidates at the top of the ticket. We have not seen that in a decade, and that obviously is going to make it much easier for people to win House and Senate races in this state. I do think people should look carefully at who's running in their district, because we have the strongest class of House candidates that I think we've ever fielded in the state of Tennessee. We have, for example, in Knoxville, strong candidates in every single district. We have veterans, we have business people, we have teachers. If you are living in Knoxville, Tennessee, there is a strong individual running for your House seat. So if you're a Democrat and you want to accomplish something, you can do it right here at home with elbow grease today. You don't have to wait. You don't have to rail at the TV. When you're watching what's going on nationally, take a moment, get up, walk outside, get in your car, drive down to somebody's headquarters and help them. It's a great time to be a Democrat in Tennessee. There are really fantastic people running for office, running for the State House, and this is a year in which they've got the wind at their back.
I've heard it said that there are 99 legislative districts in the state legislature in the House, and believe it or not, after years and years of many of those races being uncontested with just Republican candidates, no Democrats in sight, of the 99 districts that are out there, lo and behold, if you can believe it, there are strong Democratic candidates in 97 out of the 99. And that is an extraordinary achievement.
Yes, I will say we've had one or two candidates who had to bow out after we had the 97 post, but we have strong candidates across the state, and many of them in districts that have not been contested in years and years and years. And I think to a great extent that reflects the time, that reflects the activist focus of Democrats. Democrats recognize if you live in Tennessee, it's important that you, in every district, every place, see that there's an alternative voice. I mean, the fact of the matter is the Republican Party nationally is so far off the rails, and the Republican supermajority in Tennessee is perhaps even further toward the extreme of our political spectrum. They are not serving the people of Tennessee. The people of Tennessee are getting wise to that. I think you're going to see a significant change in the upcoming election.
Well, it doesn't happen with a magic bullet. For the last decade and a little bit longer, the Republican tide has been very strong. And so many of these Democratic candidates, as excellent as they are, still find themselves having to swim upstream against the habits and the traditions and what people tended to do. So to break through that, to bring the message of how they've been shortchanged, they're really being shortchanged, not just in the healthcare front, but all across the board, in terms of the kind of common sense, realistic, effective initiatives that the state can be mounting in partnership with the federal government, in partnership with the private sector in many instances, with the benefits going to the people of Tennessee, who have really, some people in Tennessee have done extraordinarily well. An awful lot of people in Tennessee haven't done extraordinarily well. They are making it, but just barely. And some aren't even doing that. And so the message has to be to those folks, listen, we can do better. There are mechanisms, there are ways, there are people who want to do better and can do better. But we've got to identify them now and support them and help them swim against the tide up until election day when they can win.
Yeah, absolutely. And step one, I think, as we've talked about, is expanded health care. Honestly, if you had a Democratic majority in the House, expanded health care would pass off the floor in about 3 minutes, and everybody knows it. Every Democratic vote is a vote for expanded health care, vote for better in-home care for seniors, vote to address the opioid crisis. So there is a very significant difference in this state between the parties, and the Democrats are the ones promoting just the most basic common sense policies that virtually every Tennessean agrees with. I think we're out of time. Oh, we have a little more time. Well, I'll tell you, since we're talking about that, I think one thing you're seeing, we're talking now about the races, if you look across the country, our huge crop of candidates, I think in many ways they reflect the kind of people who are leading the Democrats all across the country. We have Democrats that are business people. We have Democrats we have a number of veterans running, and you're seeing all across the country Democratic veterans stepping forward to run for these seats. And I'm hopeful that you'll see that the changes that we're seeing in demographics and in who's voting for whom across the country will be reflected in Tennessee. I think we will. I mean, right now we're sitting here in Knoxville. Knoxville is a city full of people who are turning to the Democratic Party, people who are professionals, who are sick of the Republicans' attacks on public universities, people who, women who are sick of Republicans' indifference to the needs of women. I think you're going to see, what we're seeing, I should say, across the country in numerous districts is you're seeing most independent voters who are looking at what's going on in Washington and are disgusted by it, penalizing the Republican Party for giving us the sort of leadership that it has. And I would like to think in Knoxville, Tennessee, you're going to see a lot of voters making that decision to penalize the Republicans for providing such obviously bad leadership. We'll have to see. Obviously, you never know with elections. To win any seat, particularly against an incumbent, requires an enormous amount of work by a good candidate. You have to have that as a baseline. Luckily, this year, we've got that in spades. And we're going to have to see, of course, how the political situation changes over time.
Well, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I know that you went up to Virginia last year to sort of observe their state level elections. And of course, most folks remember that the Democrats did surprisingly well. They almost recaptured the entire state legislature, came within a seat or so of doing that. And Democratic candidate for governor won. And what lessons, how'd they do it? What'd you learn? Is there any of the things that you saw in Virginia applicable in Tennessee?
I think a couple things. First of all, the Virginia Republicans seemed impregnable until they weren't. Okay, so for years they had dominated Virginia politics, and it was assumed that that would continue. People were estimating Democrats would win 3 seats, and they won multiple seats. 17 seats, I believe, to retake the House, or to almost retake the House of Delegates. Finally, a coin flipped it, won in favor of the Republicans. So I think, first of all, politics can change very rapidly, and people should not be discouraged. I think also what you saw in Virginia is independent voters broadly favored Democrats, and I think finally in Virginia you saw that the health care issue was very significant. There too, the Republicans were a barrier to expansion under the Affordable Care Act. People in Virginia, like people in Tennessee, thought that was really stupid, and they penalized these Republicans who were standing in the way of change. The Republicans here in Tennessee are disserving the people of Tennessee broadly, and over time, that doesn't work in a functioning democracy. I think this is a year in which we'll see the process begin of uprooting the Republican supermajority in Tennessee that's done so much damage to the state, and getting more common sense, normal people back in charge.
Well, let's all dearly hope so. We're just about out of time. I want to thank everybody for joining us.
Thank you.
And having Mike Stewart take a few minutes to talk about his observations. He's been in the thick of it, and we'll stay in the thick of it, and we'll be very, very much a leader in terms of mobilizing the Democratic forces in the fall campaign. But this is tough work. Anyone who's running the campaign knows how tough it is. So all you can do to help will be much appreciated.
That's our alarm.
Yes, I think they're saying sayonara.
Thank you.
Hasta la vista, baby.
Very good.